So today we thought that we would decide to do a chat pod around the Black Lives Matter movement. So I'm here with Paul, John, Harjit and Julie and myself, Rushane, just to talk a bit about the movement and what we as the Trust believe. As many people are aware, on the 25th of May, a black man was killed by the police in America, where police officers kneeled on his neck for almost 9 minutes. As a result of that, that sent off loads of protests all over America, all over the rest of the world, France, Europe, England, and so forth. I myself attended the Black Lives Matter protest here in Nottingham on the Forest Recreation Ground. It was a very peaceful protest. However, it wasn't until I actually went to that protest that I realised how affected I was by the situation that happened in America. So when I seen it all over social media and in the news, I knew straight away that, oh gosh, this is really sad thing that's happened. But it wasn't until when I heard other people speaking about the events that have happened and the other things that people have experienced, that it brought light to me and showed me that I am actually really affected by this. So we just thought it'd be a nice idea to just come together and talk as one, in a safe, open space where people can feel comfortable to discuss racism, because it is a bit of a taboo. A lot of people don't really like to speak about it, but I suppose where I see it is, unless we don't talk about it, it's always going to be a bit of one of those awkward conversations. So I just want to open the floor to ask everybody about their thoughts and their experiences about racism and what they think about the Black Lives Matter movement and what the Trust want to do as a whole to show that we stand against racism. So I don't know if anybody would like to, would anybody like to share any of their experiences? Or did anybody see what, sorry, Julie, I can see you've got your hand up.
Sorry, I thought I'd come in first. So, yeah, so as a white person, really, I guess it really brought home to me some of the issues that were around. So I've been aware of white privilege and I've been aware of unconscious bias, and I do some training in my own directorate in mental health services for older people around working across culture. But I think what really brought it home to me, especially with a lot of the social media and some of the information that I've seen out there, it's deeper than that as well in some senses. It's about looking at intrinsically at policies, at the procedures, at the way things are run, and how that is the underlying kind of racism and the prejudice that's in a lot of those, the ways that we are and the way that society is. So it's made me really reflect on what that means and what conversations we need to have. And I guess it's just that responsibility as well as a white person, that I need to go away and learn about those things so that I can come back and have a really meaningful conversation about that. Yeah. And I guess that was just my thoughts around that.
Yeah. Harjit?
Oh. Yeah, I've spoke to quite a wide range and diverse people about what's been going on with the Black Lives Matter, and I've had lots of different views, and I think what people are wanting is at work especially is they want to be able to talk about it openly, and one person felt strongly that if the matter is brought up, it will get dismissed, as in it's happening now, but then nobody will talk about it or nothing will be done about it, and there's nothing moving forward in a month's time. So it'd be like going, oh, that was last month. It's like last month's news, and I think that's what's caught people this time, because there's been several things that have happened in the past, and the same thing is we get a little change or a bit of notice, but what do we actually get from it, and what do people learn, and talk openly, because I was talking to a colleague today who would have been working in the same office as me, with the two BME in the office space, and I asked her, so do you think if we were in this office and this had happened, do you think anybody would have brought the subject up unless it was me or you? And she said, no, it'd probably just be me and you, and we would have probably talked about it when no one else was in the office. And that's the kind of barriers I would like to see break, and make sure my colleagues feel comfortable to ask me, can I ask you a question? Can we talk about what's happened? And I just think everybody needs a little bit more backing and saying it's okay to talk about it. You can talk about it with us, and we want to talk to you about it. Tell us about your experiences, because they've got their own. Rushane's got your own. Paul, John, Julie, we've all got our own experiences, and this is what we need more of, is to come together and talk. That was what I took from recently anyway.
Yeah. I think from you, John had his hand up, I think.
Yeah, thanks. Just following on from what Harjit's just said, just my personal sort of experience of racism and related things has changed quite appreciably over the years, as I've moved from doing sort of predominantly 100% clinical work in general medicine, psychiatry, and then moving into more staff supporting management and leadership roles. And I think to summarise, the working in the world of medicine and psychiatry, you see what's in front of you, and there's a very sort of egalitarian sense of, everybody's equal, and you treat people the same, and you care for them as well as you can, irrespective of creed and colour and race, etc. And in my naivety, it was never really an issue. And as I've come much closer to working with staff groups, it's become clearly evident that it is. And I think there are seminal moments, aren't there, where things happen, and the George Floyd is one that's captured a moment. And I think for me, it's clearly really tragic what has happened. But in terms of acting as a catalyst for enabling us to do exactly what you've just described, Harjit, with that really good example of it's okay to talk. And I've been on stage a couple of times connecting knots at Trent Vineyard when it's been quite uncomfortable again for me personally, trying to have a conversation, and I'm really mindful of saying the wrong thing or getting some feedback from the audience where there are other people are going, oh, I'm not sure about that. But as is often the case in a whole range of things, it's much better to talk about it. And I certainly come from a position of not being particularly sophisticated about this, but as I said earlier on, and the connecting knots piece today, I think organisationally it's really important that we listen and that we learn together about how we can start to adapt and support and encourage and be much more confident organisationally. So thank you for organising this. I think it's a really good complement to some of the things that we're doing.
Yeah, that's good. I agree. Paul?
Yeah, I wanted to start off by thanking the three of you as well for actually setting this conversation up. And to start off with, I like everybody else, when I saw that video footage of what happened to George Floyd, and I've had this conversation with John elsewhere as well, in terms of the language we use on that. I'm no legal person, but that looked like a murder to me, and I think the level of shock that I felt was enormous. And that's a shock with me from my space in white privilege. And actually, whilst that happened on the other side of the world, actually, what became rapidly clear was the way that the Black Lives Matter voice in the UK got found, which I thought was really, really important. And John and I have talked before about the importance of us doing that listening, and we talked explicitly about, well, how do we do that within the trust? as well. And what it did for me as well was it drew me back to, I was trying to think about what were some of the times in my life that brought racism more explicitly to me. And I grew up in Leicester in the 70s and 80s, indeed worked in Leicester a little in the 80s, and worked and was in school with very racially diverse pupils and people who'd got life experiences. I had a group of friends whose families had been kicked out of Uganda. That was what brought them to Leicester. I later worked in Leicester amongst Black and Asian communities. I remember at the time, Julie was talking about that need for self-educating for me, and I remember going on a lot of very well-meaning training courses which were basically designed to guilt trip white people, which led to it being what John was describing there about sometimes them feeling like, oh, I can't ask a question, I can't risk saying something, and actually then the conversation doesn't happen. And I think we have started with, certainly with what I've seen with Black Lives Matter, particularly with younger generations, that people are engaging, all people are engaging in that conversation much more. I think that's an important piece for us to bring into the workplace. You know, it's that challenge there that you described about the experience of, oh, well, is this all just going to go quiet again in a while? That's something that, honestly, John and myself and the rest of the board, we need to make sure that it doesn't just go quiet. So I know just before COVID started to affect the way that we worked, I met with our BME staff network, and I think we had a really open conversation, and one of the things I said to them was, you know, me saying that things are going to change, I know that there will be people sat there thinking, well, yeah, we've heard this before though, and that's absolutely right, and I don't expect that just because John's saying it or I'm saying it or Julie's saying it, that somehow that there's necessarily going to be any trust that we are going to make a difference. We have to be able to deliver some real differences, and I think that's a part of what I'd like us to be thinking about a little on this conversation. Is about, so what would real difference actually look like? Getting beyond the words. So that's my kind of starter for 10, Rushane.
Okay, thank you, Paul. I think Harjit, you had your hand up next, didn't you?
Actually, yeah, it was going off what Paul was saying. Is that was one of my questions for you, was that where is the trust going with this, and where do you want us to be with this change? Because we hear about the stats, we hear all the stuff, what the board are saying, we hear about all the figures and the res ratings, everything like that. But then we get to the point where I'm at the BME network group, or hearing people just working every day, and they don't seem to see much change. We have some change. I'm not disregarding. There has been some change, but not as much. Perhaps we're hoping at this day and age, at this time, that we were hoping to see, and it affects a lot of the frontline staff. I'm not saying, I'm not disregarding anyone else, but it's because that's the staff I speak to, I suppose. It's the front, because I'm frontline, and it's difficult to hear when you feel like, I feel like my hands are tied, I can't do anything. They're talking, but they're talking in our safe space, but where does it go beyond that? And that's where I think that's where we're falling down, is that we're not allowing the conversation to be more open, and invite that person in who's made that person feel, have a conversation between the two of them. There seems to be kind of a thing in the trust where you don't want, probably because you don't want it to get worse, but you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what's going to happen when these two people meet. and I know people say you should challenge people, but that's one word I don't like. You don't challenge someone. I was explaining to Rushane and Julie earlier was that it's better to explain, let them talk, let them be open, let them learn, have a discussion. I know you don't like, well, we like acronyms, but if you put that together, it spells told. So, you know, encourage them to talk, encourage them to be open, encourage them to, you know, learn from each other. It's not one way, it's both ways. Yeah. And discuss it, and then see where it goes. I could only ask if you know, take that approach to try it, and see where it goes, because that's what I would want to see to go forward.
Just oh, sorry, Paul.
No, go on, Shane.
Following on from what you, Paul, said, and a bit of what Harjit said, I think doing this chat pod today is a start of what we can do. So just to show the rest of the staff and even families and friends and all sorts of people who you come into everyday contact with, that it is okay to talk about. And as much as it's important for us to educate ourselves, because I was explaining earlier that even in terms of my Black history, I don't progress to know it all and to have all of the answers. So when I was teaching my son, there was some research that I had to do myself. I also had to do some research about white privilege and what I think it is and what it actually is. So we've all got a responsibility to educate ourselves, but at the same time, I've had colleagues who have said to me, do you mind if I ask you about your experiences? And I don't want you to feel as though you can't ask me about my experiences. It's not what you say, it's how you say it. So I'm happy to share my experiences. I'm happy to tell you about things that have happened to me. But I suppose unless I am willing to share what's happened to me, you won't necessarily know. So you can do your research and you can educate yourself as much, but we all have to be open and honest enough with each other to be able to feel as though, do you know what? I read about this. I didn't agree what happened with George Floyd, but can I ask you, as a Black person, like, how does that make you feel? Do you know what I mean? Because then that shows me that you're not just asking just because you want to ask. You're actually trying to educate yourself and you want to know about how to make a difference and how to make things better. And I think, as Harjit said earlier, it's a ripple effect, because if you then know something, then you can teach another person and so forth.
It's a coronavirus reversed, by the way. So you're spreading the goodness, not the badness.
Not the badness, yeah. I think, John, you had your hand up next, didn't you? Oh, you're on mute, John.
Sorry. Yeah, we need a bit of anti-corona, don't we? So just a couple of reflections on what people are saying. So I think it's important for us to organisationally to recognise that the George Floyd incident was a catalyst, but prior to that we'd already been criticised by our own staff, quite rightly, around our BME work, our apparent inability to manage some of the racism that was that we were accused of, and that's been mentioned in external reports, I think we're now fully sighted on the size of the task. I think you're quite right. We shouldn't just hide behind the stats and say, "Oh, that's gone up and improved a bit." They do inform sort of progress that you're making, but in and of themselves, they're past the point of it, really. So, just a couple of things that I think you probably touched on. So there's a couple of videos, for example, last week in my daily message. There was one on the race of life video, which, excuse me if you've not seen it, it is just conveys so much education about everyone stands on a line at the start line of a race, and people that have come from two-parent families that have stayed at the same schools, not been to the police, get more and more of a head start. And guess what? The people stuck on the line are predominantly from Black and Asian minority ethnic groups. And the second video was a relative rare one, that James Corden uses humour to talk about white privilege. And again, I've seen similar before, but it's done so well. It's things like that I think we continue to put out so that people get a sense of what is out there. We're about to launch something called Parallel Mentoring, and we're just working up with the BMA network how to get that right in terms of the form of it, and a bit of prep for people before we launch into that. But again, it's a really important part of what we need to do. I think the other thing that's important is I think we need organisationally some more bespoke training for our managers, so that they are equipped when they volunteer and step up to move into that space. They're equipped with a range of skills and expertise that helps them feel confident, not necessarily that they know everything, but they feel able to manage certain situations and know when and who to ask if they run into problems, as they will, rather than trying to manage it badly or pretend it's going to go away. And I think there's some work for us to do there. I really like that TOLD acronym. I think we could put that into practice, and then the ratings, like the Workforce Race Equality Standard, the National Staff Survey feedback on our quality and diversity scores will start to improve, and that's the way to do it.
Yeah, I like that. Good one. Sorry, I think Paul's hand was up next.
Yeah,
Julie.
If I just sort of come in on the back of some of those pieces from John and Harjit, you put out and Rushane, you both put out a challenge around the board, and this thing about data, as John knows only too well, one of my favourite questions as a non-executive director is, so what? Said in the nicest possible tone, but actually in terms of that data that we get, the critical thing is, what do we actually understand from this that means we can then do things differently? And that requires us at board level to ensure that we are in genuine listening mode when we're looking at that data, rather than getting defensive. So actually thinking about some of the messages that came through the Workforce Race Equality Standard and also through staff survey. First off, as I said with the BME network a couple of months back, we need to call out racism for what it is. And not be afraid of using the language that actually names things like racism. I think we need to be working towards understanding what other organisations are doing better than us on. So things like bullying and harassment, the actual staff progression, the workforce progression is an area which we fall down on. Some of our recruitment, actually looking at across all of the bands in employment, where are we significantly underrepresented, and asking ourselves that question about what is it about our approach to whatever the process is that may be contributing and getting in the way. And I know that there are other trusts around the country, some of which I'm familiar. North East London Foundation Trust gets now consistently really strong RES data, the Workforce Race Equality Standard data, and it's in part because they have systematically looked at the systemic stuff that needed to get changed and put the energy into that. And it comes back to me for a really basic piece, is that I want our trust to be a place where every member of staff can bring their whole self into the workplace. And for our BME colleagues, if you can bring in all aspects of yourself, which includes that experience of those daily fears or challenges or worries that maybe that you're going to experience, and that's because it happens every day, every week. but then there's a place where we can, as you said, have those safe spaces, which are also safe spaces where you can influence. And that's what I want to be able to engage with. And that whole thing about asking questions and seeking answers, I know John and I are doing a Q&A session with the BME network this Friday afternoon.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's 2:30. If I've got that wrong, it'll get changed on the slides when this gets put out somewhere. But that's going to be a really important next opportunity for a wider group of BME staff to be able to ask questions, give comments, and challenges as well. And one of the things I would want you to know is that both John and I are very much open for challenge. And actually, if you and colleagues don't think we're doing enough, we're not doing it in the right ways, it's not fast enough, we need to hear you and be challenged. So as one other little thing, I was talking with some other colleagues this morning about some of the board level changes, and one of the things that we've instituted from the last board of directors meeting is that we have now got one of our non-executive directors, Sue Nixon, is taking on a lead responsibility around equality and diversity. And the way we're framing that is, it's not that it's her job. It's her job to make sure that every decision we take as a board, she is making sure we're challenging ourselves around all sorts of equality and diversity aspects of that, and making sure that we have thought about disproportionate impact on, for example, our BME staff, or indeed BME people in our community who need our services and can't access them. So that's one of those pieces. And I'm very aware that at the moment the board of directors is not diverse. When you look at it, it's something that we are working at, and I promise you that will change. Because it's not enough to have those words if you've got what somebody once called the snowy white peaks in the NHS, where the higher up the organisation you go, you end up with fewer and fewer black and Asian minority ethnic faces in there. So I'll stop at that bit and let Julie get a word in.
Thank you. I guess it's picking up on a couple of things that have been said earlier, also about our clinical work and who our services are for, really, as well. But to me it's also about making sure that our services are appropriate for the communities that need to use them. So I remember a few years ago now working with Javid Khalik. I don't know if anybody knows Javid, he was around a while ago, and David Connolly, looking at how we could make one of our treatments more transcultural. And I think for me, one of the strongest things that came from that was a gentleman in that group who said, I felt I could actually talk in here and be listened to. And I think it's really important that, we look after our staff, but we also, once we're looking after our staff, that needs to transfer to our service users as well. And we need to make sure that the services we're providing are appropriate for the people that use them.
Yes. Thank you, Julie. Harjit, your hand was up next.
Oh, was it up? I'll put it down then. I'll lower mine. You go ahead.
I was just going to say it's quite refreshing to hear that, and I'm really glad that we've done this chat today, because it's refreshing to hear what is happening at board level, because day-to-day life we don't necessarily know. So it's nice to know that things are being acknowledged, people are being listened to, and change is, it may not have happened as of yet, but change is going to come. And I think as a black member of staff, that makes me feel a bit more secure that, okay, everybody else doesn't just agree with what I'm saying because they don't want to be looked at as racist, but everyone's agreeing because they know that this isn't right and this is how it should be and things should be different. So it's refreshing as a staff member to know that change is going to happen. I know Rome wasn't built in a day, so it will be a process, just like anything else, but it's just nice to know that it is being acknowledged. Sorry, Harjit, your hands. Is it just me now?
Yeah, I think when we talked about when I've talked about it, thought about it, always when it comes to racism, inequalities or anything like that, no matter what happens or what position I'm put in, or someone says something to me or does something indirect or direct, I try to take the high ground and try to be the person that reacts in a positive way in terms of explaining or asking the questions and ask them why, or get them engaging. Do you think you should have said that? Do you think you should have done that? Or perhaps you shouldn't use that word. You should use, and that's the message we want to give today, is that we're asking for change, but we're not asking for a fight or argument or anything like that. We want to be positive. We want people to talk. We want people to ask us questions, colleagues, anyone. You want to meet up for a coffee and have a chat at lunchtimes, we're happy to do that. And I know lots of people might not want to do that, and that is okay as well. We're not expecting everyone to be, as taking that approach. Everyone's different, and we don't expect people that ask us. We don't expect you to understand what we go through when things are said to us or done to us. We're not asking for that. We just don't want to be dismissed when the subject is brought up, because that happens a lot in when you deal with it with managers. And I think that is just due to the confidence. So, and I don't think it's to do with them being racist. I think it's just purely because they just don't know how to handle it or how to talk to us. And I just wanted to make that clear, because that's a lot of pressure for them too.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that goes back to John's comment earlier about us needing to be better at supporting our managers, but also to be being really clear what we expect of all of our managers. And one of the things for me is I would like to get to the organisation where actually it's not left to Harjit or Rushane or the other BME member of staff who's on the receiving end of something that is inappropriate or racist to be the challenger, but that actually you have the confidence that your white colleagues will be challenging before you do. It's not your job. It's not your job. And I think that's part and parcel of the cultural shift that we need to get to. I know time's running on. I did wonder if there was one thing that you wanted to ask of us, Rushane, Harjit, and also Julie, in terms of John and myself, that one thing that you would want us to be taking away to focus in on in terms of absolutely working hard alongside you on this anti-racism agenda, what would that be?
One thing that I personally would like is the message to be, like I mentioned earlier, the ripple effect. So I think it's very important that staff know that it's okay to not have the answers, as long as you are willing to educate yourself and you're willing to learn and even reflect on your own experiences. To me, that's a big start, at least.
Great, thank you. How about you, Harjit?
Oh, well, I saw something on the BBC, right, which is it got my attention. There was a guy on there, and he wrote a poem, and he talked about doing I don't know if you've heard of the dance move called the electric slide.
Oh, yeah.
Of course we have.
This is my proposal. Is he talks about how you do the dance move and everybody does it together, and then they all automatically know the dance move, and you form into formation, and you can do it in social distancing, and they move smoothly, and they move together, and they become like one group. And that's what I would like to see, is people, I saw that. It's like learning, isn't it? It's like, I understand. I've talked to that person. I want to move with you. I want to be able to come together, and then the group gets bigger. It's like it being in a party. It gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's where it becomes a change. And that's what I would like to see when I think of, us doing this today and going forward.
Sounds really good. Sounds really good. Julie, anything you'd add in terms of a challenge for John and myself?
I think it's really positive to hear that you're hoping to make the board more diverse, because I think that's a really good thing to do, good start. And I think having conversations like these, I think it's more of a comment really. I think having these conversations is really positive, and being able to discuss it quite openly, and to make sure that we take that further. And I think it's just reiterating really that that we would really like to see it continue and make sure it doesn't drop off that agenda.
Great.
Yeah.
Fab.
So lastly from me then, I'll commit to doing more of these. Think present company exceptional, but there might be others that want to do a similar thing. And again, Rushane, you might want to help organise that for us.
Yeah.
I think two things that I'll probably I'll take probably out that I'll commit to. One is I think working up some principles of how we work together on this. I shared with Paul the other week a really neat 1-page 10 points which sort of struck me immediately as being principles, perhaps to find a word for it, but just sort of emotional guidance on how to be in this space and to share it well together was a really powerful bit, and we might want to sort of share that and titivate it to meet our own organisational needs. And the second point, which might take a bit longer to get going, but I think it's important, will be that guidance for managers bit. And again, I think that'd be really important if we could co-produce that in terms of what managers would find helpful and what our BME community could add in terms of content, so that we've got a really nice piece that could be a part of the organisational DNA and way that we do things in the future.
Yeah. Perfect.
Great.
Thank you. Has anybody else got anything they would like to? Is everyone? Because I know we've gone way over our time, but I just want to thank you all for doing this chat pod, because, like I said, it literally stemmed from me realising, I'm actually more affected by this than actually thought. So it's lovely to know that I put the idea out there for it to happen, and then I got you 4 lovely people to join on the call to talk about these difficult conversations. But I think we've done it in a positive way, and I'm looking forward to seeing the change that's going to happen and us all working together moving forward.
Great stuff.
Great stuff.
Thanks for your
everyone.
leadership on it, Rushane.
No problem. Thank you all.
Thanks very much.
You.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.